Okay, thank you very much for coming. This presentation is kind of an advice for someone who have an idea and ask himself, what do I do about it? How do I move forward? And we are talking primarily about technology idea, although it might be applicable to other kind of ideas. This is a kind of presentation I gave about a month ago in Berkeley, and it was targeted to the same kind of audience, technology who are looking to continue their work on technology, but maybe end up coming up with something that deserves a spin-off as a startup. So we're going to talk about what is a patent, how to obtain a patent, the key point to be aware of, some discussion about the strategy, where can I learn more about it, patent in business, and summary. The unfair advantage, a key point for any wannabe entrepreneur is your idea could be great. You could be great. That doesn't mean that someone will give you money, because there are many, many great ideas out there. Any time someone has enough money, he gets opportunity to invest in many of them. And you need to choose one. So the one thing most astute investor would look for is what they call unfair advantage. They're looking for something unique that you could provide that nobody else has to make you successful. That kind of an unfair advantage could be many things. As I said in the preamble for this presentation, you could be the son of the minister, and therefore you're going to get some government treatment that nobody else could get. And could be many other things too. But usually, if you are a scientist or a student, you don't have that. And you might not have even a unique management team with know-how in the market, some unique. So what can you get? One of the things you could get is some kind of protection, and if you got that, that is huge. I've done multiple startups, and usually one of the audits that was critical for the investor to go on was what they call the IP due diligence. They wanted to really make sure that we really have an IP, because if the idea is good, then surely some other people will follow on, and they may end up taking, we're going to just be what they call the pioneer who gets the arrow behind, because he's leading and then gets the arrows, and then the people after him get to enjoy. So how you are not going to be the one who is dead and other people walking all over you for the golden whatever, is by having some protection that guarantee that if the idea is good, then at least the commercial success will follow. And again, there are other stuff like unmatched team, first mover, all of those. On the IP, there is more than just patents. There could be, for example, trademarks. If you own buy.com, you probably have some assets that could be a base for success. So sometimes a trademark or .com could be a valuable asset. Trade secret is also illegitimate, and Coca-Cola is the perfect example. They never patent the Coca-Cola formula, and therefore the success has not been limited by 20 years. They've been successful 50 years. And the story says that it's still something that only 2 people on earth know it, and they carry it over and all of that. So trade secrets are sometimes very good, and if you have something unique and you can somehow know that nobody can figure it out from what you build, then maybe trade secret is a better way. And by the way, trade secret is a well-known element in the legal system, meaning if you have a trade secret and you maintain it as such, and there are some rules how you maintain, what guarantees that you act appropriate in maintaining it, if someone steals it, you can stop him. It's not okay to steal trade secret, and you cannot compete by stealing something. So if you maintain a trade secret and you define it as a trade secret, and there are some procedure, it has to be marked as such, it has to be kept under lock, that is not open to the public. But if you do certain things and someone penetrated it and took it away from you, you can hold him by court. So patent is not the only one, but in many cases it's a very broad one, because trade secret is not guaranteed that someone cannot figure it out from what you do how to do it, and therefore they don't infringe any rule, they did not break any of your safe, and they still build something that competes with you. Some key points about patents. First, it's a legal instrument. So if you want to do something, I advise you, just like anything you do, you should know about what you do. If that is a key part of your strategy, learn about it. Specifically, I like the US, and of course, I know it a little bit more, but there are good reasons to. The US Patent Office, and I'll talk more about it, is a very unique one and very powerful one, and therefore, you can use their website and their advice to learn how to do it. Patent could give you protection, exclusivity for 20 years. That's a lot of time. But even more than that, for example, a very simple idea, if you just file it first as a provisional, and within a year you file the patent, you now got 21 years, because there is a 1 year for the provisional and another 20 years. If you do other strategy, we can discuss some of them. You can extend it a little bit more than 20 years. Patents themselves could be a product, and we'll talk about it. And one pointer for all wannabe entrepreneur, remember, everything takes longer than what you expect. So build yourself to hope it will happen soon, but be prepared that it will take longer. So make yourself designed for the long term. I pick something that just came out of the media this week, and that is Marvell lost $1.17 billion patent verdict. It's very appropriate. The owner of the patent is Carnegie Mellon, and it's just 2 patents. Happen not to be in the main line of business for Marvell, because it's in their data hard disk. It's not the main business of Marvell, but it's $1.17 billion. And in fact, it's not the end of it, because the jury ruled that this was a willful infringement, which means the judge could do triple damage, and that could end up being $3.96 billion. Could be worth more than, their damage could be more than the market cap of the company. So patents are really, really powerful. And if anything, just months ago, Apple was winning $1 billion against Samsung. So when you're talking about $1 billion, you know, a lot of startups would love to have within 5-10 years a business that generates $1 billion net or whatever. It's a big number. Very few startups get to that level of net revenue. So patent could be an asset and definitely a protection. What's the principle of patents? Fundamentally, it's a contract between you and the government, the nation. You give something, you get something. What you give is the nation, the government, the people, your invention. In return, you get 20 years of exclusivity. It's very important to understand that barter, because, for example, if you can be proven that you did not teach, then the contract will be not really honored, and the court will rule out that you didn't teach, and therefore you don't deserve a patent. There are some limitations. Those are very unique. The invention has to be useful, yeah, but if it's not useful, then it's not a big deal anyway. The invention should not be a law of nature. That is a little bit problematic, but not for electronic game. In the biospace, it's a very question, because a law of nature, many times it's question, is it really a law or something that deserves a patent? So the discussion is still going on, but the law says it cannot be a law of nature. And then there are 2 numbers that you should remember, 102 and 103. 102 is a good one, although it's the most severe one. It's if someone has invented it before, then you don't deserve a patent. But that is black and white. If it's there, you see it, and oh, sorry, someone thought about it before, go home, do something else. 103 is a more gray one. It's the obvious. And in reality, everything is obvious, because what we do, we are just human beings. We think about it, and we combine stuff, and whatever we do is built on stuff that was before. rarely you can argue that something is by far not obvious. So it's a very gray area, and when you get a rejection of 1 or 3, you need to learn how to deal with that, because it's a very sticky one. It's fall into the gray area. How can I prove something is not obvious? So we can talk about it even more, but those are the 2 things. It has to be not obvious. What is a patent application? Basically, 3 parts. Specification, where you teach the invention, and the only real requirement is that a person in the art could understand how to build it. What is a person in the art? Let's say we are talking about something that has to do with electronics, or let's say a BA graduate of this institute will constitute a person in the art. And he can understand what you taught, then the invention was taught. There's no requirement to teach someone who never learned electronics, but someone who did graduate at this institute could be considered a person in the art. Drawing, you have to have at least 1 drawing. And those are assisted the teaching by visualization. Claim are the legal piece of it. It's the exclusivity definition. And there are basically 2 aspects. One of them, it cannot read on something that exists before. So you should know what exists before your invention, and you should be involved in the claim. I'll talk more about it. But it cannot read, and read means if you get that claim, it cannot be shown that if that claim has been allowed to you and you own it now, you can really now restrict something that exists before you and say, hey, you cannot build it. And you like to come up with some claim language that will read on anyone who uses your invention. Because if you could really practice your invention without infringing your claim, then you have a situation that you have got a patent, but it's not really useful because someone really can compete with you and not infringe the patent. So those are basically the 2 challenges about claim. We'll talk about it. Now let's go more specifically into it. This now is a teaching, how to write a patent without a lawyer. And some of it could be taught relatively quickly. Somehow the lawyer teach us that we need lawyers to write patent, but it's not true. In fact, it's not by the law. Inventor by himself can file a patent. There's no limitation on that. And it's not by the nature of what the patent law is about, because if it's a contract between me and the government, I'm teaching and the government gives me exclusivity, is this a good way for me to teach my invention that sometimes could be a sophisticated idea by me talking to a lawyer and the lawyer write it down? That will be a good teaching. I guess you would not go to a class who will teach you how to transistor work through a lawyer. You would like someone who understands the art to teach you, and not someone who got to be talked with that guy and write it down. So you can read patent sometimes, and you read it and you don't understand a thing, because it's written by a lawyer who didn't understand what he's writing, and nobody bothered to really correct him. So if you write the specification, it could be pretty good. The teaching could be good. I'll give you some guidelines what you need to do so the lawyer will not mark you as not doing it right. So one of the things you should do, don't use the term should, use the term could. Write it open, meaning if I say something should, because in matter of speaking we sometimes use should, just this is it. Then I can say in court, oh, this should be that, meaning if I do something else, it's not. So may is okay, could be is not good, might be, or whatever. So use open language, don't be deterministic. That's easy. You just set a mind that you don't talk in, use a lot of gray. You teach what you want to teach, invention, but don't use deterministic language. There's no reason to do it. The second element is a little bit more tricky. But I can tell you, lawyer is not going to save you from that problem. Within the field, we have a lot of assumption. We are in this space, so when we say very precise, we know what it means. I mean, if I'm in lithography, I'm in semiconductor, and I'm talking about precise alignment, I'm not talking about nanometer level, not micron, not meters. Because in lithography, we are now at the nanometer range. So if you are not nanometer aligned, you are not aligned. But if I just write precise alignment, I might have a problem later on to use it because I didn't define it. So try to use numbers. Don't use very hot. Use a number. 600 degrees is very hot in some cases. 100 degrees is very hot for my hand. So don't use adjective. Use numbers. I can say it many times, and I can find myself falling in that pitfall many times too. Because as human beings, we are always using language with some assumption behind it, and it's very hard to disconnect ourselves from our common language, especially in specific art, and, you know, transparent. What does it mean? I mean, there are so many things. So the worst is the adjective. Whenever you use very strong, very light, very, or stronger, lighter, all of those warning marks, use numbers. And a practice, if you really like what you invented, it's not a bad idea to find someone whom you trust. Ask him to read it and tell you if he understands it. If he does, then you probably did your job. You did teach your art, and that give you the patent. Then comes the claims. Now claims, I would not expect a young engineer mastering this specific part of the patent quickly. I'll give you some hints, but it's okay to use lawyer. But there's a good news about it. As a startup, in the beginning, you don't have a lot of assurance that this is a good idea. You're not sure. You like it, but you're not sure yet. So at that phase, you really want to reduce your costs, and lawyers are not reducing costs. So you may file it. The spec cannot be changed. Once filed, that's it. At a specific time, you file the spec, that cannot change anymore. That gives you a priority, and any word over there that you want to change later on can be taking your priority date away. But the claim, you have 20 years to change it, if you maintain some rules. So that gives you huge flexibility. If you have a patent, and you use very low budget to file it, and you can file it for less than $1,000, the claim language could be changed for the next 20 years. So maybe someday later on you raise money, you raise $5 million, and you can pay a lawyer to look on your claim and make them better. If your spec is good and there's number and the teaching, you can get very good claim later on. So you might learn how to do the claim, you might not learn. You have flexibility about it. You don't have flexibility about the teaching. So the teaching is what you give to the state. What you get out of it is a claim. That is something you might change later on. Claim language. So first, how do you change the claim? Sorry. The US, which is again a fantastic system, give you infinite rights to do what they call continuation and continuation in part. Meaning I'm taking the same spec, I'm putting a new claim, it's called a new patent. It's a continuation. If I add some extra language, it's continuation in part. You are allowed to do continuation of a continuation, meaning I file a continuation, and then I can find continuation of that continuation, and that I can do for the next 20 years. Not in all other places. In Europe, they don't allow continuation of continuation. Some other places call it divisional, and there are some limitations. There is one limitation in the US. If your patent got issued, you cannot do continuation anymore. But you can overcome it very easily, because you can have a continuation of a continuation a day before it published or issue, sorry, a day before it issue, you file another continuation, and you can still can go. So a good lawyer will not pay the issue fee, meaning you get a notice for allowance, meaning the US government is willing to give you the patent, but they ask you to pay some fee. Before you pay the fee, you file a continuation. Now you know that you can keep on, and then you can get issue. If you don't do that and it's get issue, now you cannot do anything with that patent. So a very important practice, always file continuation before you pay the issue fee. And you didn't do it before you pay the issue fee, you still have 3 months before it gets issued. Just do it before it gets issued, and you're going to get a warning when it's going to issue. So just file continuation before that, and you can keep on doing it. Not trying to teach you claims language, because that's a little bit tricky, but I'll give you some hint about it. And what's important about it is you do talk with your lawyer about it. Claim is invention for itself. So there's an invention of the idea, but the idea of what you claim is also an invention. And I'll give you an example. Some of you may know it, so please don't say it. Those that don't know it, welcome to try it. Singer invented the sewing machine many years ago. I think it was 30 years ago. They were able to get a claim that nobody for the next 20 years was able to overcome. So they had exclusivity for 20 years on sewing machine. And they got a very, very nice claim. Anyone want to attempt what was the way Singer protected the sewing machine that nobody can overcome it?
The needles.
You knew about it or you guessed it? I asked someone, okay, the needle, so let's finish it. The needle. Normal needle is you have a head, you have a holding, and you have a hole. That is the way we're sewing usually as human being. But in a sewing machine, you hold it here, you have a head, and the hole is here. So it's a different. And they just got protection on that one. Good enough. You cannot build an automatic sewing machine without this needle, and therefore nobody could overcome it for the following 20 years. But it's not the invention itself, it's the understanding how to claim it. So any invention has a whole challenge how to claim it, and that is an art by itself, but it's not necessarily something the engineer should be out of it, because engineer can understand what's unique about the patent. He understands the technology, understands what the other people have done, and work maybe with someone who knows how to use the right language to articulate it in a claim language. And you can read about how to do invention, because there are some books about it. I put some books there. Okay. Something about the US system. It's a very friendly system. And not just because I happen also to be living in US. The inventor can file a patent by himself, and we do both. We do file with lawyers, and we do file ourselves, and we can see the difference. A standard practice for us is for all our patents, if we get a rejection, we talk with the examiner. We don't try to communicate to him by documents. We do talk with him, preferably eye to eye, meaning flying to Washington and meet with the guy. First, the system says that you are allowed to, and the PTO, the Patent and Trademark Office, guide all the examiner to grant you interview. And it's critical, because if you are a document, it's very easy to say no to a document. It's harder to tell someone in the face no. So people tend to be a little bit nicer if they meet with you and see you. But there's also a lot of other type of information you can relate to examiner when you meet with him, which the document will not show up. First, you can relate to him that you understand this business. I mean, they get a lot of document, and they don't really know garbage from diamonds. If they meet with you and they impress with your understanding, maybe they say, hey, this guy is really an inventor and a smart guy. So that's one very good thing to do. Second, you can understand what is the hold-up from the examiner from granting you the patent, what bothers him. You can, I mean, if what you invented was not head-on on something else, then now it's a judgment call. And if you understand why the judge is judging against you, you have a chance to convince the judge to reverse his opinion. So I'll back first to lawyer, non-lawyer. If you do it yourself, you're going to find a very friendly examiner. The patent office encourage examiner to encourage individual inventor. If you come with the lawyers, he's very formal. He's by the book. If you come by yourself, he's a friend. He has time to spend with you and getting points just for chatting with you. He can tell you sometime, you know, I just came back from the shopping. You know, some of them do work from home. He can tell you about his wife. I mean, now it's, you know, man-to-man talking. And he's free because no lawyer, no restrictive situation, and he's allowed to advise you. He even can tell you, no, if you write it this way, that solves my problem. With the lawyers, he let the lawyer to do it, he cannot do it. But when he can guide you. So depending how you build this rapport now, you might be able to have him help you how to overcome his rejection. Funny, but that's the system. So I would say like that. First, remember, the examiner is a judge. He's not pampered with salaries and, you know, everybody rise with the guy. He's not get that type of honors, but his power is as a judge. Because when he's making rulings that you got a patent, you now have a tool, just like a judge give you a judgment that you now can go and ask someone to enforce it. So this guy who is getting not really high-end salary, his subjective decision, I'm saying again, patent decision is not objective. It's a judgment. There is art, there is new idea, he needs to say it's different, it's unique. In most cases, I mean, again, I'm not talking about if your invention already been invented by someone else, you have no case, go home. If you are different, then is it obvious? It's not obvious, it's a judgment call. The judge can say yes, can say no. And he may do that based on many, many elements, and if you treat him right, it might be helpful. So treat him right, and you may get the whole thing allowed. The other part of the US system is, as we mentioned before, you can do continuation. Another very interesting part of the US system, most people don't know about it, and most lawyers will not tell you about it. You are actively selecting every time you file a patent, should it be published or not. So with Europe or other nation, it will be published 18 months from the priority date. In the US, it's a decision you make. You can make it to be published or to make it to not publish. If you make it not published, you have to declare that you have not intention to file it abroad. So they say, okay, if you are committing just to file in US, it's not going to be published, you just select it. This is not a binding commitment. If after a year you decide, actually I do want to file it abroad, you can reverse, you pay some fee and now it will be published. But as long as you don't want to be published, as long as you don't file it abroad, because if you file it abroad, it will be published anyway, you don't have to be published. A warning, if you elect not to be published, don't do filing abroad without changing this decision, because then you can kill your patent. Third one, or fourth one in the role, the US patent system is really not expensive. What is expensive is a lawyer fee if you're using a lawyer. Usually lawyers in this game charge anything between $300 an hour to $600 an hour. But if you file it yourself, then you don't have those fees. The PTO office charge you some fees. You get 50% reduction if you are declared as a small entity, and 75% reduction of those fees, which means that you can file a patent for $400 if you are declared a micro entity. And there are some rules, you don't have more than 4 patents, but you know, a lot of people will be allowed as micro entity, which means you pay a really small fee and you have a patent. Then another thing that is unique to the US system, you have multiple way of acceleration. Meaning you can let the patent stay there for 2 years, which is the normal time between filing to judgment or first office action, or you can accelerate it to get feedback within 3 months. Sometimes having a patent in hand is usually, it could be very important. Especially if you want to raise money, then it's one thing to tell a potential investor, I did file a PCT, or sorry, I filed a provisional. I mean, I love it. They want me to take to risk my money on their invention, and they were not willing to risk money to put a real patent in place. They did provisional. Now I need to be excited and give them my money. Sorry, I'm using my because I'm also a little bit angel investor too. So when someone tells me I file provisional and he tries to raise money, I'm already one step back. Maybe I should not get involved with this guy. He doesn't believe in what he's doing. Why should I believe? So that is one. But if you can show me I got a patent and I can read what he got, I can say, wow, he really got the whole world in his hands. So a patent in hand is far more than many patents on bird in hand. So you could accelerate for much less than a year. An example, this is a patent of mine, was filed in September 27, was issued in April 2012. 6 months. It was allowed in 3 months kind of thing, and then it takes additional 3 months to get issued. So we had the patent in hand in 3 months from the time we filed. We use acceleration, it's called track 1. It costs you a little bit more, $2,400 if you are small entity, $1,200 if you are micro entity. Not a lot of money. Not for a real patent. And I'm now going to tell you a secret. Most people don't know it. When the American Invent Act made as a rule, Obama signed it for a law, they came up with 10,000 allocation for acceleration, and they did not consume it. We were jumping crazy. We filed immediately before we thought, oh, 10,000 will disappear in like in a week or two. No, they never are. Most people don't use this acceleration scheme. Beat me, I don't know, but they don't. Okay, so we just talked about time, and time is an important element. But I'll tell you one more thing. When you file track 1, you increase your chance to get allowance on the first filing by 2x at least. Why? Few reasons. First one is the examiner gets a lot of points for getting you track 1. So he don't mess with you. He sees in your patent, he's not having a direct hit on you. He let it go and gets the points. What can I say? He's a government official. He is a bureaucrat in reality. He's a judge in his power, but he's a bureaucrat in his mentality. He has a system, and the PTO examiner union negotiates this deal for track 1, and they get good points. He don't have a real good reason to reject you, he'll allow it. So you're getting a chance for getting allowance big time if you go track 1. Second, it takes you seriously. It's like I said before as an investor. If I see provisional, not serious guy, why should I invest money? It's the same thing. He's track 1. He really believes in what he's doing. I must take him seriously. Examiner many times, when they see a patent first, they reject it, don't even read it. They say, maybe the guy is just trying, so let me throw something in him. I don't need to spend too much time. But he's not going to do it for track 1. You're a serious guy, he read you. So you get different treatment from the get-go, and we see it every time. Our success rate with track 1 is significantly better than normal patent. So we get them faster, and we get them. Pretty good. Don't tell everybody about it. Please don't make it public. Oh, this is a public domain presentation. Okay, I'm screwed. I talked about the examiner, the judge. So again, we interview in all cases. The only case we don't interview is a case like that, when we file and get allowed before we do anything. So before we get ready, we already got allowed the patent, we don't interview. If we get a rejection, sometimes we don't get a rejection. We just know who is the examiner, we suggest to interview. Interview before. There is a procedure, pre-action interview. You are allowed to interview. Now he has a judgment. He don't have to do that, but there is a procedure in the patent office to interview before you even get an office action. Why would you do that? To get allowance, to have twice, on the same game. So if you meet with him first and you educate him, you half steps there, you still have rejection, you can interview again. Now we have to give you that. So we do meet with them even before, and sometimes we can kind of make progress. when we meet them, we have a kind of a standard presentation. It starts with introducing yourself and selling yourself. When you're selling anything, the first thing you're selling is yourself. Introduce yourself, convince you are something. Then you teach him the invention. Don't expect he can read it from your spec, because he's not going to read your spec. He doesn't have to. He just read your claim. And he may not understand the claim, or read them differently than what you expect, and not necessarily have a respect on what you've done. So if you meet with him, and you teach him what you invented, what the other people have tried, what they failed, and why your invention is unique, he now understands what you're doing, and is already half step in order to give you. Then you show him that others have tried and failed, if you can do that. And finally, you ask him, okay, is this okay? And he said, well, you know, I have a problem with this word. I read it differently, or whatever. He is allowed. I mean, he can interpret the claim language as the broadest way that could be. And sometimes we have a case where we're talking about semiconductor, one layer, another layer, and this is on top of that, and then he is not allowing because he's inverse the whole thing. And now you see the substrate on top. I mean, but he's allowed to do it.
How do you know what is the correct time for the interview? How to get to the...
You call him up. You call him up.
Because you told us that there are 2-3 years before...
Yeah, so we call them, I mean, if you go to the patent office, you see that your patent has now assigned an examiner. You can call him up. The next time, if you don't do that, he sends you an office action. You get, after 2 years, a letter, a rejection of first office action, and now he has the whole thing why he didn't allow you patent, including his phone number and his supervisor phone number, and when you can call him up. And you call him up and you set up the interview.
But the whole idea here is that before he reads...
Yeah, so if you want to do pre-action interview, I mean, both are okay. Interview after office action is still okay. Interview pre, he's not always going to grant you that. He don't have to. But once you see that a patent has assigned to your case, and you're really edgy about it, you call him up and say, would you mind having an interview before office action? He may say, well, I don't even know anything. I say, okay, I'll give you introduction, all of that. So fine, let's do it. So we've done a lot of that. I mean, some of our patents are really big. So, and we have now a situation, we file more than 70 patents on Monolithic 3D. So many times the examiner already know me. And he's seen my spec. And he say, okay, Zvi, let's have an interview before, I don't want to read, teach me what the whole thing so I can focus. And so sometimes I do it directly with us, sometimes he's doing it directly through our lawyer, so it depends on the case. So it's all of those options, but you definitely in any office action, it's a standard. At the end, he give you his phone number and his boss phone number. So it's very important when you talk with him to try to reach an agreement if it's possible. And sometimes it is. He read your language, you say, okay, if I insert that line into that and expand it now, is this help? Yes, okay, let's do it. You reach an agreement, you have a patent. International PCT. It's okay if you got a lot of money. It's extremely expensive. It's nice because when you do PCT, a treaty, and it gives you about between 18 months extra before you have to go to the national phase. It doesn't give you a patent, but it gives you kind of the right to do a patent. So you file it. It is costly, but not so expensive. It gets costly later on. So you file it, and after 18 months, you have to go to what is called the national phase. Meaning every nation on earth you want to have a patent, now you have to go specifically. And those are expensive. If you file in Japan, it has to be in Japanese. If you file in Korean, it has to be in Korean. If you file in Germany, it has to be Germany. If you file in France, it has to be French. So there are many languages you have to translate. Now you have to use lawyers. You cannot do it yourself anymore. And it could be extremely expensive. So China, I did file in China. So translation to China and all of that, yes. What I'm hearing is that it doesn't work today and it will work tomorrow. Meaning China is shifting to be part of the community. They're getting more and more technology savvy, and they understand that if they want to play the game, they have to be honorable about patents. So every indication tells me, and every market research or professional indicate, yes, you file now in China. In fact, in my book, it's the first priority because I have more people than anybody else. So we file first in China, then in India, then in Europe. Because in semiconductor, you want to go by the people, because again, 10 years from now, those are big markets. And semiconductor go by people. It has to be, so it's a low-cost device, but it's sold in billions kind of thing, so you want those billions people. In different markets, it could be different conclusion, but it is expensive. So my advice, for most startup, US is good enough. It's a big market. If you win that market, it usually is a leading edge market. You're going to be okay. So one bird in hand, it's better than two birds in sky. It could be extremely expensive. China, now you start to talk about $10,000 easily, and then everything starts to cost you money because everything goes through lawyers, and it's a different story. So for most people, I say just do US, do multiple patents, and you got one big market under your exclusivity, you're going to be okay.
Is there any reason to file this deal? All your competitors are American-based companies?
Well, you have to go by the market, meaning if there is a big product and there is a good market in France, they're not going to build it in the US, but they can build it in China and ship it to France, and you don't want to lose that money. But on the other hand, I would say my advice for most startups, just do US. You have to be rich in order to go abroad. So if you've got some VC money and the board is for it, and that's sure. But if you try to do your own startup, it takes some time, and you're running in the garage, in your home, and your friend, you get some money from your father, your mother, your friends, all of that. Get the US, forget the rest of the world. You got a good business anyway. Don't worry about what you give to the other people. In fact, competition many times helps to sell your product. If there is a lot of stuff happening by competition abroad, then the US market will want to have it, and now they have to pay you. So it's not bad to leave some room for other people to do your job. So I don't think that any invention needs to be protected all over the world. And for most startups, just get US and you're going to be happy. And important parameter about the US, it's not going to be published unless you choose to. So if you make a strategy decision, I'm just going to go US, you can do on top of that, I'm not going to get it published. You can do on top of that, I'm not going to do acceleration right now because my first patent might not be my best. So you file one, then you file another one, then you file another one, and you go for a year or two. Those are good, and then finally you come up with you understand enough to know this is really good. Now you file it, now you go and get it accelerated. So, and now you may be bringing up a lawyer to help you about it, check the claim, check everything. So you can play the game as an individual for 1-2 years. You may decide to take a chance after 2 years and file one with no priority date, not as a PCT, but as a new one. So you started 20 years because if nothing came in between and nothing got published, why not to try after 2 years a new patent that has no priority, just starting now. And you can take another one, you go priority. So you can try. If something came in between, you go priority. Then you start new, and you got another new year. So those are the strategies you can play in US because your stuff is not going to be published. Because many times, once it gets published as a PCT, it's read on anything later on, so you cannot do other things because it's now public domain. You cannot do the battle with the government too many times because it's now public domain. Okay.
What is the interest of the U.S. government to give you a patent that they don't publish? I mean,
it's not going to be patent. Okay. The idea was like that. The U.S. system is fair. So it's like that. We're going to do a deal. You're going to give me teaching, I'm going to give you exclusivity. Because we are a fair nation, as long as I'm not committing you to exclusivity, you are not committed to publish. So you write it, but it's conditioned. Only when I give you the exclusivity, it gets published. That's the way the law was set. Then the European care up. The Europeans are not nice. They say, okay, you want us, you want a chance to get exclusivity, publish it. No, that's the rule. You can complain about the French, you can complain about the German, that's the rule. They did it this way, and they've been doing it now, and the rest of the world follows them up. And then they start to talk with the US how to merge the system. So he says, we have a solution. If someone wants also to file in Europe, then they'll have to play by your rule, then they have to publish. If they decide to stay US, we'll give them our own version of the original rule, which means it doesn't have to be published. Once it gets allowed, then you have to make a decision. You pay the issue fee, it's going to get issued, it's going to get published. You don't pay the issue, it's not going to be published, it's going to kind of abandon, you can respin it. So you have a lot of more flexibility with the US system, a lot more flexibility, and that means that you need to understand what you're doing, because it plays a strategy, and it has to be different to different people.
So what happens in case of an infringement if it's not published?
If you don't have a patent, then you don't have any tool. So first get it issued, then you can do something about the infringement. So as long as you don't have a patent in hand, you cannot do anything about it.
When it is not published, it is not issued.
Correct, because once it's issued, it gets published. So the first thing you get is a notice of allowance. Let's say that you did it not published. You get a notice of allowance, meaning the US government is willing to do this deal. They give you a chance to say, okay, I'm going forward. So you start the whole thing and say, I'm going for a deal. Finally, the government saying, I'm willing to give you a deal. I'm willing to give you the 20 years exclusivity. You pay the issue fee. Now the deal is done. It's going to get issued. It usually takes about a few months. Okay.
And you mentioned the example of Marvel, okay, in the infringement
Yes.
case. Can you talk about how much it costs to impose such an infringement?
Well, a court case is about $10 million general. So it's not a cheap one. You cannot, as an inventor, you cannot do it. But the good thing about it, for $1 billion, a lot of lawyers will do contingency. So there is no problem getting lawyers to do contingency or VC to finance this contingency. So there are other, but lawyers, there are many of them that would love to do contingency if they see something like Marvel. For $1 billion, the guy didn't invent anything. Yeah, he doesn't have to, he's not spending 10 million out of his pocket, because it's the billing hours which he has to pay anyway for all the guys. So it basically, you know how much it costs him, but he charges you like a $10 million fine. It doesn't really charge you because it's contingency. If you get 500 million, forget 500. If you get 10 million, it's still a good deal. So contingency is very standard if you have someone who infringes you. Lawyers will love to take it. So about provisional, I said before, it's okay, but very important aspect about provisional. In the provisional, what you have to do is you have to do the teaching. If the teaching was done not seriously, you think you got something, but you got nothing, because the teaching has to be there. So be careful if you do provisional to do it seriously, at least as far as teaching. The power of US patent. We just talked about imposing it through the court, but it's not the only powers that you have. There is another thing in the US which is very interesting. It's called ITC. So you have one patent, but you have two ways to enforce it. The one is to go to court. The other is to go to ITC. What is ITC stand for? International Trade Commission. The US, long time ago, has put a law that the government will stop anybody from importing to the US something that infringe a patent. Now it has to be to protect the US industry, so you have to show some US game stories there, but that's not really hard to do. But now you have a different system, much cheaper. Now you don't talk, it's still expensive, but not $10 million. This will be done in $1 million or $2 million. And since everything is produced in China, if you have, you don't have the ability to get payment, but you stop him from importing to the US, And if you stop an important product to be sold in the US, it's usually a lot of money that people will be willing to pay you so they get the license. Of course, you can sell the patent to a competitor. The Technion does teach about patents, so I advise you, if you are planning to be an entrepreneur, try to learn more about it. Patents are also a product, so you first can protect it, but you have now an asset. The asset could be sold as royalty. In my startup, in each of my startups, my first dollars were actually licensed. So in Chip Express, we end up selling at the time I left $40 million of chips. But in the first year of sales, it was $1 million of license. And the early sales are really important because at the time you have a very young startup, and if any money that you can show of income are really important. So in each of my startup, the first dollar I got was actually royalty. As a product, it's very interesting because if you are an inventor, if you came up with something technology, you may not even build a company. And when it's applicable is where you have something that, you know, when you talk about startup, there are two types of startup in general. One is called Brave New World. The other are called Faster, Cheaper, Better. The faster, cheaper, better, because your technologies are either faster, the cheaper, the better. But that means that the market exists and there is a producer for that market, and they may be willing to license your patent. And usually there are more than one, so maybe one of them will license your patent. So you have a product, you can sell it. And the beauty is, if your product is patent, you don't need to have a full team, you don't need manufacturing, you're minimizing your risk. Rambus, Tesla are a good example. Each company are in the semiconductor space, IP-only companies. At some point of time, they were $1 billion in the market. Now they're a bit less. Now there are other instruments like Intellectual Venture, RPX, Acadia. Each one of them, it's a different story. They're all public company now. RPX and Acadia are public. Intellectual Venture are not, but they're all very, very big money. And portfolio has been, of patent portfolio has been moving up in value. Recent deal are about $1 million patent. A company like MIPS, I think you have heard about them. There was also an Israeli point about it. MIPS was sold recently, but actually it was broken up to two pieces before getting sold. First, the patent portfolio was sold for something like 400 million. Then the company was sold. The company was sold with the operating in revenue and everything for 60 million. Now, Siva started to beat against imagination, and it moved up to 100 million. But still, it's very far away from what the patent portfolio was sold for. So patent has a lot of value. The other very well-known story is Nortel.
Kodak is a case right now.
Okay, 600 million, I believe. But to competitors. So Nortel was sold, just the patent portfolio was for 2.4 billion. Before that, all the operation and that's for 900 million. So many times patents are worth more than the company. Those are the story about it. Talking about 20 years exclusivity, I'd like to talk a little bit about what that means and why it could be very exciting today going forward, because what in the past we don't care much. So first, life has changed quite a bit in the last 100 years. In the old days, most of the available effort or budget on the consumer market was to buy food. Now food is a very small piece. So there is huge market today for technology-based product. The other thing that have changed quite a bit in the last 100 years is access to information. Today you come up with something and the whole world know about it. So there is an acceleration of technology penetration. So this is a Moore's story. This is a change in consumption, and you can see there's the other piece. I mean, it used to be food 43%, now food is small percent, and the other is a big thing. More money behind it. Good thing about it, acceleration of technology use. Invention of technology to the time it gets used, getting faster and faster. This is another way to show it. The availability of communication across the whole thing, and this is probably the most important chart on this game, is that in the early days, it took maybe 100 years between inventing a new technology to the time it spread around. So if you have 20 years, you don't get to enjoy it much. Then came radio, and it still took 50 years. Then came personal computer, that took 25 years. Now mobile phone, and now you're talking about time that within few years, between invention of new idea and make it huge volume, it's 5 years. So all of a sudden, there is a shrinking of time between invention and mass production. And that means that 20 years are now really, really valuable. So that has already impact how company are valued. Intangible assets are now becoming a very significant part of the value of company. So Qualcomm is now the largest market cap company in semiconductor business, where the revenue is a small portion of what Intel is doing, but their IP portfolio is much more significant than what Intel has, and therefore the market cap is significantly more. The other part about patent is that while the life for idea to mass volume has shrunk quite a bit, the nation have extended the life of patents. So when the Congress made the patent law 1790, it was 14 years. And then after so many years, they moved it to 17 years, and recently they moved it to 20 years. So the life exclusivity of patent has been extended, while the time to take idea to market and package, great for us, because now we can get exclusivity for 20 years, and we maybe enjoy it quite a bit. Royalty is now growing business because of those trends, of course. So summary, filing a patent could be an effective first step to create an enticing story for investors to put money behind it. You can file a patent for less than $1,000 and make it such that it's a continuation, so you can spread more money about it later on as you get more and more confident or more and more money. If you are to be an inventor, then do learn patent story. And if you are in the Technion, maybe you can use what the Technion offer you for learning that. My own advice, try to focus on the US, and the US system is really flexible and nice about it. And if you do that, you might have a product even without a product. That's basically the story.
What about the local patent?
A Israeli one? I don't know enough about the large market in Israel to tell you if you can extend a lot of royalty for it. But as far as I know, Israel is a relatively small nation compared to the US. So under the Israeli law, if you are inventing something in Israel, you're supposed to file first in Israel and then to go to the US. But as far as I know, nobody have enforced it ever. So it's a choice. The law says you should file first in Israel, then abroad. But I don't know of any case that someone has been really made sorry for not doing it. So that's what I know. And again, Israel is still a nice market, but I don't know enough to tell you if those features that I mentioned exist in Israel. I think they don't, but maybe there are other things. And again, with patent, what's really important is the value of this exclusivity. For 6 million, 8 million is something, 300 million, 400 million is more, and $1 billion is more. So,
About the provisional. For students in the Technion, is it advisable to issue a provisional patent?
it's not a bad starting point. But again, now let's ask ourselves, what do we mean when we do provisional? If you write something not serious about the patent, page and a half, then you got something that's worth nothing. If you took the time to really do the teaching, then why not file a real patent? What's the difference? The provisional costs you $250. The real patent costs you $450. If that $200 are a big thing for you,
Not 2,000.
again, now it depends. Are you micro entity, mini entity, and so forth? But let's say the difference between provisional and patent is a few $100s. For some people, it's huge, and I cannot tell for someone else, $100 is not a money. It is a money for some people, and that could be a good reason to do provisional. And there are some advantages with provisional. The disadvantage is that you are not in the queue, and you are indicating to everybody else that you are not really sure about what you're doing. So you are not really, putting your foot down. Maybe you have something, okay? Maybe you have something, maybe you're not. And I have to put money behind you maybe. So it's not the greatest testimony of belief in yourself. But it could be a starting point. You file the provisional, then another provisional, then you get your act together, then you file a serious one. So it's a legitimate game plan, but not if that is excuse to do it lousy. Because the spec, within a time, give you a priority. And if that's done poorly, then you got disclosure in a way that doesn't really worth of anything. If it doesn't do the teaching, so I'm not worried if you use a lot of the word embodiment of whatever language of lawyers. That's fine. You can use normal language. That's okay. If you teach, you teach. But if you didn't teach it, and I read what you put in there, and I don't understand what to do about it, then you got nothing. Now, if you didn't think about using numbers, and you have something that describe, but when I read it, I don't really know what it means, and it's harder. So if you do a little bit of real effort, then you might as well, at some point in time, file it. And once you file it, you start in the queue, you get examined. So I would say, in general, it's okay, but be careful what you're going to do about it.
If you'd like to be assisted by a patent attorney, then how to choose one and how to compare between them?
You ask a very good question, and I'll tell you what the Achilles heel about that. When I go to a doctor and ask him for medicine because my throat is hurting me, I take the pill, and if after a few days it's not better, I'm coming back and say, something's not good, and the doctor needs to do something about it. If my car is not running, I take it to the garage, I'm taking it out, and it's not running, I'm not really happy to pay the money, I'm going back to the garage, fix it. So in most engagement in life, we get feedback pretty soon after we pay the money, or either before or after. And we see that we get something against our money. You go to a patent lawyer, he writes something. If you don't understand what he's doing, then you're going to have probably 2 years of quiet, which tell you nothing, because you don't even have an office action yet. Let's say you didn't do acceleration. Something was filed. Maybe it's good, maybe it's bad. We don't know. Then you got a patent. It could be sometime 4 years afterward. And you still don't know what you got. Now you got a paper that say a US patent with a number. I can tell you 90% of the patent I looks not where the papers are printed on, because the claim language is not good one. Sometimes it's crazy. I mean, I've seen a patent when I know the invention was really a good one. And I went to the claim and I said, wow, why a patent lawyer get him such a long claims when this guy invented some fundamental technology? I know he did, but not the claim. The claim is really good. So you get this patent now, and you try to bring it to someone you think they are infringing, or to someone you want to say, let's do a business, I have something, I have asset. They read the claim, say, that's not a thing, don't really catch anything. Now you got nothing. Maybe it sometimes take 5 years. That lawyer is not in the firms that you work in. So it's a big challenge. How to pick a lawyer? I mean, part of it is fundamental, because as long as you don't really know the stuff, he can really do a lousy job. So if you have someone who is a friend or a family member, most likely, even after 5 years, still a family member, so he's not going to be taking the risk of, after 5 years, looking pretty bad. If you have someone who has good rapport, that you know he's a good guy, maybe. So it's a very hard question, because here is an engagement where the feedback is so far away from the job you've been paying for, then how can I tell you got a decent job? Remember one more thing, lawyers care about themselves like any human being is supposed to. So he is working for Intel and he's working for you. Intel give him 100 cases per year, you give him 1 case once every 10 years. Where do you think he's putting the effort? It's another disadvantage. As an entrepreneur, when you come, you don't, I mean, today I I can come to my lawyer and say, hey, I gave you 17 patents, take care. But as a young individual, you don't have track record. He don't know if that he's going to say one time, not again. How much of an effort? Now, if he doesn't understand what you're doing, then he can still fill the page with words. That's easy. But does he really teach what you do? So I would say it like that. It's a hard decision. If you know someone, if you know the relation between you and that someone are long-term, he's a neighbor, he's a friend of your friend, something, then it's a good starting point, because at least you might be able to get the time of the day for him to really spend and think about it. The problem is, it's very easy to fill up the hour, but to think clearly, what's the difference here? Where is the hole in the middle, kind of thing? Because that's what you're needing for. You don't need it for the spec. You're needing for the hole in the middle, in a way. And if you don't take the effort for doing that, what did you get paid for? I don't know.
Last question. Now that you got your patent track 1 published, can you tell a little bit about the company?
Monolithic was on 10:30. I spent an hour teaching about that. So, but we will publish it, I believe, on and on our website we talk about it tons, so you can see about it. And we actually list our 17 issued patent. We got granted 26 patents, but we had 17 that are issued. We list them. You can read them. So there's a lot of information on our website.
Okay, thank you very much.
אתה מרוצה?